you all for joining us. I want to dedicate today's class to a very special friend, Tzipora Bat Esther. She knows who she is, for her, and she taught me a lesson in resilience, in doing the things you fear the most so that you could become apt at them and you could move forward. And that's what Parashat Mishpatim is about. We're going to start the Parashat with the Eved Ivri, which seems like such a mundane thing to be talking about. So we're going to rewind just so we're all together on this. Last week, I forgot to do this. Oh, Lynn, you're on your game. Wow, she's recording it and everything. Last week, we had visited the mountain of Sinai. There was the smoke. There was the thunder. There was a sound of shofar. It was a major moment. It was the most dramatic moment, other than splitting of the sea, that I could think of that we experienced together as a nation. We were supposed to be, or possibly, on a spiritual high, and no sooner does God give the 10 commandments, and the people have a setback, and they recoil, and they say, Moshe, please, we're afraid that we might die if we continue hearing the voice of God. And there are a lot of different commentaries saying either God spoke the first 2 and Moshe spoke the next 8, regardless of all of that. But today, coming into Parashat Mishpatim, which is going to be a series of laws that seem to be just cobbled together with no specific order, I'd like to look at it again a little more closely with the mountain in the backdrop, with Har Sinai in the backdrop. There are a lot of commentaries and questions as to when were these laws given exactly. And this is where the famous Ein Mukdam U'Meuchad B'Torah comes into play, that not everything is in its exact chronological order. Why I say this is because were all of these laws given while Moshe was up on the mountain? Were all of these laws given while Moshe was still with the people? And I think there's a very important significance to how, why, where, and when they were given. But even more important than that is how can we relate to these mishpatim today? So we'll start from the beginning and we'll say that if last week, think now in terms of orientation. If last week, all of the orientation were energies that were coming from the heavens. God himself is coming, and you're seeing the words Hashem Yarad. God is coming down, and Moshe Ole Vayal, he's going up. So I want you to get sort of in this frame of mind that what's happening here, the new reality, is that the God of the heavens that occupies the domain of the celestial, of the heavens, of the Shamayim, he is doing what? He is Yored. And at the same time that God is coming down, we are Olim. We are going up. And you'll hear very often that Har Sinai is considered like a chuppah, like a marriage, like a canopy where people will get married under. And there's a lot of this imagery. And they'll go as far as to say that it's a marriage between God and man. And this is where he takes us to be his people. I want to take it a little further. And I want to say that, unfortunately, the greatest show on earth, which was this scene on the mountain where God's going to manifest himself to all of Bnei Israel, this scene goes awry. It doesn't end very well. I'll read for you the words. It's a little bit hard and difficult to read, but it says, Kol ha'amru'im et hakolot ve'et halapidim. Already, they are seeing the thunder. Can you see thunder? You hear thunder. And they are hearing the lightning. Can you hear lightning? It's the thunder that you hear and the lightning that you see. And so the Torah is already telling us that their senses were confounded. They were so overwhelmed by this experience that they couldn't even contain their physical faculties, and they say these words. And it gives again the scene. The hot is ashen, the mountain is smoking, and the people see Vayanu'u vayamdu mirachok. And so they retreat, they recoil, and they stand from afar, and they tell Moshe, Daber ata imanu. You know what, Moshe, this whole experience is too much for us. It's too overwhelming. So why don't you speak to us? And this way, the Elohim, the God, won't speak to us directly, pen namut. We're afraid that this experience is going to bring us death. This is a major concern. And Moshe tells the people, this is not the time for you to be recoiling. God is coming here in order so that he could put his awe upon you. He wants to manifest himself. So rather than fear him, you will be in awe of him. And the people, it's lost on them because the people stand from behind, and only Moshe is the one that starts making his way. You could see it in a movie, right? He makes his way towards the clouds, towards the arafel, towards the smoke. That's a cliffhanger because we don't know. I mean, we know now because I always say, I wish we could read Torah as first timers and not know what's going to happen, so we could really experience it and have that sense of what's going to happen next. Is Moshe going to live? Is he going to make it? And sure enough, God speaks to him there, and this is maybe a good segue for us for today. He tells him an unusual thing, and he says, when the people decide that they want to make some kind of memento, some type of souvenir, some type of a remembrance of this occurrence, he says, Lo ta'asun iti Elohe kesef. Don't make silver gods out of me. Don't fashion gold out of me. Mizbeach hadama ta'aseli. You know what I want you to make for me? I want the Mizbeach, I want the altar to be made out of Adama, out of earth, out of dirt, out of rocks and earth. That's what you're going to make. And most of the commentaries will say that God is not impressed with all of the fanfare and all of the bells and whistles. I'd like to suggest something maybe even more organic. Maybe what God was telling Moshe is that if the people want to, a korban means karov, a sacrifice means to come close. In Hebrew, the word for sacrifice and come close is one and the same. If the people want to come close to me, then the vehicle through which they will come close to me should be made of earth. We know when he says this word Adama, what are we thinking to ourselves? Make it out of Adam. Let each person be the human article by which we come close to God. And we've seen many verses that says that where God tells the prophets, I don't need their sacrifices. I don't need all that. All I need is for what? Is for them to bring of themselves. We know that the first one to bring a sacrifice was Cain. Cain first. His wasn't accepted. Yeah. And do you know why? Because it says in the verse, Vehevel hevi gam hu. Hevel also brought a sacrifice. But Cain's wasn't rejected because Hevel's was accepted. Cain's was rejected because what Hevel brought was gam hu. He brought himself. And so now, this is just a little introduction to this week's Parashat. We're establishing a couple of things. As human beings, we don't do well with the big one-shot light and sound show, because what's easily gained is easily lost. We know that already. I always say that about my diets, but if you lose the weight quickly, you're going to gain it quickly. If you try to acquire this spirituality, this connection with God in a one-shot deal, it's not going to be sustainable. It's going to very easily dissipate. And so that's what Parashat Mishpatim is a response to. I'd like to say that this week's Parashat is responding And it's sensitive to the notion that human beings of flesh and blood have a very hard time to connecting to something that's so totally transient and unattainable or unfathomable. I mean, if you sat somebody down and you tried to explain to them the idea of having faith, I don't even know where I would start with that. But the Torah is very smart. It knows exactly where to start because God is the one who created us. And he recognizes that there's 3 relationships that have to happen in order for this connection, the vertical connection that we saw, the energies that flow from above to connect with the energies that flow from below. These 2 energies, for them to work, we need to have, if you ever think of a skyscraper, how tall could you build a skyscraper? If you go to math class, it depends on the base. The height depends on the base. I can't just have this standing on one point. It's not going to stand. The laws of physics in the natural world dictate that the higher you want to go, the wider you have to go. So if you want to go high, think of the proverbial mountain. If you want to climb that mountain, if you want to get to the top of Har Sinai, if you want to have your Moshe Rabbeinu moment, if you want to meet God halfway on top of the mountain, then what must you have first? You can't just go vertical. You have to first go horizontal. You have to first forge relationships. When I say horizontal, I mean between man and man. That's what Parashat Mishpatim is going to be, or we think it's going to be mostly about how to live in a society with each other. Because if you can't all live together, if you don't have a strong base, then what's going to happen? You can only go so high depending on your base. You want to widen your base, and that's going to be the laws of man and man. And we're going to talk about those. But there's a 3rd relationship, and I think that's the one that sometimes we miss. The relationship, of course, one is between man and man. The other one is between man and God. Those are 2 easy ones. But I think the most important relationship that God is going to focus on here, because you can't have one with your fellow man and you can't have one with God unless you have a healthy relationship with yourself. And that's what Parashat Mishpatim is going to talk about. So if you think we're going to learn about slaves and this one's ox goring that one's bull, that's not what this is about. It is on one level, but if we take it in the context of where we are here, we can't move forward as a nation. We can't move forward and have a relationship with God unless we understand why these laws are given to us at this particular time. So I'll say this, Parashat Mishpatim starts out, Ve'ele HaMishpatim, it starts with that Vav HaChibur, the Ve'ele. That means this is connected to something. What is it connected to? And I think this is the most sensitive thing that we're going to hear from the Torah. Instead of God getting upset to say, really, I set up this whole thing, I put flowers on Har Sinai, I got dressed, I made a whole plan, and what happens? My guests are no-shows, because they were supposed to go up the mountain eventually, but they didn't because they recoiled. Instead of God getting upset, do you know what he does? He stops and says, wait a minute. The famous, you could take the Jews out of Egypt, but it's not as easy to take Egypt out of the Jews. And what God does is what we're expected to do for ourselves, for our fellow man, before we could have that relationship. So when it says Ve'ele HaMishpatim, and now these are the laws that God is going to put in, and I'll read you the words because it happens to be very beautiful. Asher tasim lifnehem. It seems the English is going to say that you shall place before them. Lifneh means before them, but it really means lipnehem. You should put it literally on their faces. And what does that mean? It's one of the beautiful words in Torah that means itself and its opposite. My panim, or my face, it's what you see. But the same exact word is used to describe that which you can see, bifnim, my insides. And so before I could show you my face, I have to first know who I am inside. And this is what the Torah is saying. And the Torah is going to speak and say, I get it. God is going to say, I understand why they couldn't have the relationship that I intended for them. I set the stage for. It's because they still see themselves as slaves. So let me talk about slaves, because otherwise it makes no sense. I'm in the desert and you're giving me laws of when you become the master and have slaves. I have no relevance to this understanding in the middle of the desert when I myself was a slave. You're telling me the laws of the master? What do you want me to do with that? God says, that's not what I'm telling you. I am telling you that if you want to have a broad mind and a spiritual understanding, you have to stop seeing yourself as a slave, and you have to start seeing yourself as a master, because you are master. That's what he told us last week. He said, I'm taking you out of Egypt, and I am appointing every one of you to be a mamlechet kohanim and a goy kadosh. Every one of you is a melech. Every one of you is a king. Every one of you is a priest. Every one of you is holy. Every one of you has tremendous potential, except if you think that you're a slave. If you have the slave mentality, that's going to stand in the way from you becoming what I have intended for you. And the beautiful thing is that God recognizes that. It is a human tendency. I printed this out because I just thought it was so telling for the times that we're living in, for what was, what is. There's a French socialist theorist, Pascal Bruckner, and he highlights what Sigmund regarding the psychology of victimhood. If you want to read beautiful writings, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has articles upon articles where what he's stating is it's okay to recognize that you were a victim, but you can't stay there. If you stay there, then you're adopting the mantle of victimhood and you're seeing yourself as a victim. And what Rabbi Sachs says is every human has the capacity to rise above that, to move forward. It's the same like the Jews in the desert, but what this psychologist, what he quotes Sigmund Freud as having said, Sigmund Freud examines the nature of certain people who, having suffered diseases or setbacks during their childhood, believe themselves exempt from the sacrifices that apply to humanity as a whole. That means that if I suffered as a child, I get a pass. I am exempt from the rules. I'll show you. They have endured enough to never have to accept any further deprivation. They can commit injustices since they have suffered injustices themselves. They are exceptions, and life owes them reparations. If this isn't chilling, I don't know what is. He goes on to say, those who feel they have been wronged in some deep fashion often believe they have earned the right to act how they see fit. The same morality that binds others is not relevant to them. I'll give you a minute for that to sink in.
I need a minute.
Is that the cookie?
And it's,
The Twinkie defense, is that why they use the Twinkie defense?
I don't know that. I'm not familiar. I know the marshmallow test, but I don't know about a Twinkie defense.
I suffered, yeah.
Yes, yes, because I suffered, I am exempt. I don't have to follow the laws. What? Yeah. Hmm.
And it still holds.
And so, of course, and so again, Hamevin Yavin, we're all smart people here. We could all apply this to circumstances and situations, modern day. But you know what's so smart? The Torah from day one is saying, don't get stuck in the victim mentality. You're going to see yourself as a slave, you're going to become this person. And you're going to think that you don't have to follow the laws because society didn't follow the laws when it came to you. And then what's going to happen? It's going to be a total vicious downward spiral. And so what is the Torah doing right here in Parashat Mishpatim? The first thing he says, when you become taskmasters, when you become slave owners, when you become the boss, what did the Torah just do? It painted a different picture for us. It said, stop sitting in the seat with a cap on top of you that says victim. Take it off. Take it off. You're not in Egypt anymore. Nobody's whipping you anymore. I know post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm familiar with it. But the truth is, the idea that the Torah wants to tell us is that every one of us not only has the potential or the opportunity, it's a law. We have an obligation. We're not allowed to stay stuck in that place. And it's interesting, on top of it, they say that statistics say that a lot of the parents who abuse their children were themselves abused. But the part of the study that they don't tell you is how many abused children go on to continue the cycle of abuse with their children. A small percentage, because the human spirit does have the ability to break the cycle. And that's an opening statement of Parashat Mishpatim, that it's asking us to overcome those dangers of seeing ourselves as victims. And not only that, it goes on to say, it's all this in this week's Parashat. The foreigner, don't torture him. Don't oppress him, because you know what it feels like. So maybe it's saying, break the cycle. Just because you were tortured, it doesn't mean that you have a license to continue torturing. Just because you were tortured, it doesn't mean that the laws don't apply to you. And so what relationship is the Torah speaking to here? It sounds like it's speaking to how I should treat my fellow man in this horizontal relationship. But really, it's taking the arrow, that little return arrow, it's taking that arrow and it's curving it and it's pointing it back into ourselves and saying, first, point the arrow at yourself. First, see who you are, understand who you are. Don't go out there making friends unless you know who you are. Then you could make your friends, then you could build a society. And once you do, and that's what's going to happen here. We're going to have next week, we're going to have the Mishkan being built. We're going to build an entire physical structure before we're going to get I was going to say before we get the 10 Commandments again, but this is one of the big biblical debates. What came first? The tablets, the 10 Commandments, that physical tablets, or the tabernacle. So that'll be, God willing, for next week. We could talk about that. Now that we are addressing this, a couple of things come to play. There's a word that appears 18 times in our Parashat. Happens to be not only my favorite word, but I think a fan favorite word. And the word is shalom, peace. And in what variation does the word appear? It says, if you were to crash somebody's car, of course it doesn't say that, if your ox were to gore his ox, or if somebody fell in a pit, or if you caused, I'll say it this way, if you caused the damages to somebody else, to their person, or to their property, then the words that the Torah uses, and 18 times, because it's v'chai b'hem, this is how you're going to be able to live. You have an out. Because the Torah recognizes that the first thing we do when we make a mistake is we say, how stupid can I be? How dumb am I? I can never get out of this. I could never recover from this. And the Torah is saying, shalem yishalem. There's a way out. You pay 5 times an ox, 4 times a sheep, 3 times. I'm going to give you a system by which you could pay. Shalem means to pay. But it also means shalem. It's going to make you whole again. And it's also going to bring shalom, which is peace. All those words play together with each other. You could actually buy your peace of mind. But that's only if you choose to forgive yourself. It's only if you choose to say, I'm human, and I want to move forward. I want to move past this. I want to be whole, and I want to be at peace. And that's really what all of this is going to be about, because we're not going to have another encounter with God until these ideas end up becoming established. And I'm going to take you through some very beautiful ideas that the Torah is going to give us. It's going to talk about many of the laws here touch upon the laws that were given on Sinai, the Shabbat, the respecting of the parents, the not murdering, the not being a false witness, not having strange gods. A lot of those are spoken of here, but they're spoken from below to above. They're said in a way that the voice isn't coming from the heavens calling down. It's telling us in a practical way how we could keep these commandments. So I'll show you a few because I happen to have found them very interesting. One of them, it's for my Zoomers who have Humashim, I see in front of you, chapter 23, verse 19, happens to have a beautiful statement. It says, Reshit bikure admatecha, Havi bet Hashem Elohecha, and then it says, Lo tevashel gedi bechalev imo. I'll explain it in English. It brings together two unrelated, I would say, laws. The first part says, make sure you bring the first of your fruits, your bikurim. Make sure you bring your bikurim to the house of God. And then in the same verse, it says this, it's repeated 3 times, this idea throughout Torah. Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. Don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. This happens to be one of the go-to laws that many people get very, very vocal about, because the laws of milk and meat, of dairy and meat, come from this. The original, the Av, the father law, is not to cook a goat in its mother's milk. And many people will say the likelihood that the milk in my fridge and the meat from the butcher is from the same animal, and that one is from the mother and one is from the child. And the likelihood is so far out there that we're having separate dishes even. We took this law very far. I'd like to look at the law and not its halachic ramifications, because that's above my pay grade. But I'd like to see, how does this law speak to us, to rebuilding ourselves with a capital S? What on earth could meat and dairy have to do with rebuilding ourselves? So I think this might even be a Kabbalist approach, but milk, and maybe it's really, we're all women here, so maybe it's really a practical approach. When we think of milk, zavat chalav, we think of milk flowing. And as women, we know that milk flows from us as well. Milk is synonymous with kindness, with the flowing of kindness, maybe even of nourishing, maybe even of sustaining and building and feeding. And that's the idea of milk. Meat, on the other hand, is much more synonymous with, if you think of meat and you think of it red, and by the way, the milk is white and pure, and you were all smiling when I was describing the milk, but when I describe the meat and I tell you it's bloody, and in order to eat meat, there had to be violence, and it's tough, and it's everything about the meat is the Kabbalist would call it gevurah. There's like strength and toughness in the meat, where there's softness and flowingness and motherliness in the milk. So we have a law. If you eat dairy, You have to wait a very small amount, consult your local rabbi, a small amount of time before you could eat meat. But if you eat meat, you have to wait a much longer amount of time before you could eat dairy, right? I don't know if I want to eat this corned beef because I may want to have some coffee later. You know, you don't want to wait X amount of hours. Now we want to take this back and apply it to ourselves. If this is about how we act, how we react, how we're going to build ourselves, what might we understand from this? If we're going to approach, let's just say, we'll use an example, somebody did something that they shouldn't have, whether it's a child, a spouse, ourselves, we did something wrong was done. There's two basic approaches. You could approach the situation with love, and you could say, I wonder what could have caused them to do that. And also, my daughter-in-law is the parenting expert, but I know that to engage a child, if you just scream your lungs out at them, they're going to completely shut down and you're not going to get through to them. So you want to engage. You want to have the person open and being able to hear you. And so maybe we want to approach with milk. We want to, I'll use the term, we want to give them a glass of milk. What does that mean to give a person a glass of milk? It means I want to come to you with kindness. I want to come to you with understanding. I want to come to you with the goal of doing what milk does. I want to nourish you. I want to feed you. I want to make you stronger. I want to make you better. This is where Torah is coming to talk to us and say, when you're engaging with somebody else, are you engaging to build them up? Or are you engaging to do what? To give them a piece of your mind to make yourself feel better, because how dare they? The Torah is saying, take the milk, give them something, and if you start with milk, notice, if you start with dairy first, how long do you have to wait before you bring out the stick? How long do you have to, if you already brought the child in with love and care, and they trust you, and you heard them, and they feel loved, then you don't have to wait a very long time before you come in and give them the givura, the strong, hard talk. I'm not saying that, oh, just love everybody and that's it. No, the kids need to be disciplined. Or if somebody did wrong, they need to be told. Or even for yourself, you need to acknowledge what you did wrong. But if your first instinct is to drink a glass of milk, then you won't have to wait so long. But I'll say it the other way. If you come to a kid and kill them to the floor and really, really beat them up on this, or anybody, you attack a friend who wronged you, what's going to happen? It's going to take a much longer time, longer than 6 hours sometimes, to do what? You can't do kindness second. Kindness should always be your first approach, your first reaction. You could always go the tough route, but the tough route will have so much more effect if you started with the milk. Because if you start the tough route, you may never get a chance to give them that cup of milk. You may lose the opportunity. You may go so harsh and so far that they can't hear or won't want your kindness. These are, again, self-building for ourselves. Our first thing should be not, why was I so stupid? What went wrong? What can I change? Next time I'm going to do it better. And then you could kill yourself. And then you could beat yourself up. But by then you already what? You already established a foundation of love, of trust. These are, again, if we look at all of these, the next verse, right? Well, there's so much beautiful things here. The piece that came right before it was Reshit Bikure Admatecha Tevi El Bet Hashem Elohecha. It's telling us to bring bikurim. You know what it's really telling us? This is, if there's only one, I'd say it's a lot, but if there's only one thing I could walk away with, is that God gives everybody a second chance. Because why are you talking to me about bringing my bikurim in the same verse as telling me to exercise kindness before strength and force? Because who brought the first set of bikurim? Who was the earliest first farmer? Back to Cain. It all goes back to Cain. I think I spent the whole year talking just about the Cain Hevel relationship and how that established everything that was to come. So because Cain brought his offering and it was rejected, it doesn't mean we love to live in absolutes. I'm never gonna do this. Is always that. No, God is saying, yeah, you brought one offering that was rejected once. My door is open and you could bring me Reshit Bikure Admatecha. And when I talk about bringing Reshit Bikure, the first of the fruits of your land, I don't just mean the physical produce. I mean, bring yourself, who's made from Adamah. You could always come back to me. Because when you come back to me, says God, I'm going to give you first a glass of milk. And if I have to give you a slap on the wrist, you're going to get a slap on the wrist. But first, remember that my door, my office is always open. Come back. Don't ever think that you're that far gone. And then the next verse right after that, you can't make this stuff up. Hine anochi sholeach. I'm sending an angel to guard you on your way and to the place that I have prepared for you. You know what God is really saying? He's saying, stop doing the math in the physical world based on what you could see. I'm telling you, it's not the first time we're seeing this. Where else did we see that an angel is going to go in front of us? Don't make me start saying Hamalach Hago Eloti, please. But when Yaakov blessed his grandchildren, he wasn't just telling them that the angel that goes before me should go before you and should protect you. That's beautiful. It's a gorgeous beracha. But he's saying something else to all of us reading this. There are angels, and there does exist in this world, despite our ability to see them, there are forces. You want to call them angels, you want to call them energies, whatever you're comfortable with. God is saying there's so much more to this world than that which your physical eye sees. And so I'm going to reiterate the blessing that Yaakov gave to his grandchildren. And I'm going to say that those blessings are still alive and well. And they're recorded here for who? Not just that nation, not just those people at that time. It's here for us today to say, I'm never alone. I'm not in this alone. God said he's sending his angels. And those angels are going to protect me. And the angels that Yaakov had given to his children, do you remember the rest of that Hamalach Hago Eloti song? He says, V'yidgu la'or b'keref ha'aretz. You know what you're capable of? You're capable of proliferating like fish in the center of the earth. What does that mean? It doesn't make sense. If there was fish that were in the center of the earth, it would be kaputnik. They wouldn't survive. You know what the blessing was that Yaakov gave his sons and God's giving us now, reminding us of these angels that are following us? That even if you are considered fish and you're out of water, because I am infused in your lives, you're going to be able to still, you'll still be able to proliferate like fish, even if you're not in your natural habitat, even if it doesn't make any sense, even if the physical world says impossible. God says, wow, I'm going to make all those things possible. And why do we need to hear this now? Because it's very hard. It all sounds nice and we hear the violins in the background, but it's very hard for us to really accept that this huge change is possible. And it's scary to actually rise up to what God is telling us we're capable of. So he's going to tell it to us in many different ways. And in some ways, it's going to sound like he's not even telling us that. It's going to sound like he's telling us don't eat meat and dairy when he's really saying be kind to yourself. It's going to sound like he's giving us laws that have nothing to do with us. It's saying don't enslave yourself. Don't keep yourself under oppression. Even a slave gets to go out after 6 years. Even as, what are you doing? Some people hold on to things for years, forever. Even a slave gets to unburden and let it go and go free after a while. So I'm going to just give you a couple of more examples of what the Torah is going to describe. So in I'll stay in chapter 23 because it happens to be very beautiful. In verse 5, it tells us a very strange thing. It says, 23, sorry. In verse 5, it says, if you see a chamor, if you see a donkey, again, you could be very bored by this, and I wouldn't blame you because we don't own donkeys, we don't come across donkeys. The likelihood of our seeing a donkey, of somebody who hates us, who is burdened by all of his weights. And then what does it say? V'chadalta ma'azovlo azov ta'azovlo. Even if you see him crouching under his burdens, and your initial instinct might be to abandon him, because after all, he does hate you, you should help him. What is this speaking to? What is the relevance that any of us might have to this donkey who was being saddled and burdened and weighted down?
Vivien, it's Morabina. It's just what happened in Turkey now with the earthquake.
Oh, wow, yes.
Israel was front and center.
Always. I happen to love that. And that's a very practical, so we have Morabina with us. She's giving a very practical application that the Jewish people or the Israel, they send their Magen David Adom, even to countries that have what? That have bombed us, that have terrorized us. If you go to the hospitals in Israel, I went with Katie one time, I couldn't believe how many terrorists they are getting their wounds treated by our Jewish doctors.
They don't even recognize.
So they don't recognize the country. They don't recognize, right, that's what I'm saying. But who is the first to go? Israel's going to go because we are humanitarians. And I think that happens. I'm so glad you said that, because that's a direct parallel to the application of this law. Hamor in Torah also means chomed. Chomed, which means weight or physicality. Very often the hamor is synonymous with the physical world. And so if you are being bogged down with all of this physical stuff, and again, we have to always take this and see ourselves in here. We are the ones who are being bogged down. We are the ones who are under the burden. What is it telling us? It's saying your tendency is going to be to do what? Is going to be to let the burdens bear you down and keep you down, because that's what happens in the physical world. But it keeps telling us in as many ways as it can to please allow for the burdens to be lifted. And what is it saying? This is, I think, the nicest part of the whole thing. You have to lift it. You have to be the one to lift it. We can go to 1,000 self-help classes and read 2,000 books. It's all going to say the same thing. You could let somebody else lift your burdens. You could let somebody else help you out. But at the end of the day, what do you have to do? You have to be the one. In here, again, if you'll be sensitive to the equation, where is God positioning us in this story? We're in the position of what? Of helping, of lifting, of saving. We're not the one that's under the burden, but he wants us to start to see it in a little bit of a different way. To say, I'm in a position to help. That takes us away from the victimhood that we started with originally. And not only am I in a position to help, if I don't help, nobody's going to help. If I don't come, there's going to be so many situations in our lives that if we don't, if the tishtadeli yot ish, there's 100 pirkei avot you could read that are going to say this same thing. You see a situation, it came into your orbit, it came into your circumstance, because you're the perfect person for it. Not the why me, what do you want from me? No, Moshe, you don't have an ability to speak. You have an impediment. I'm coming to you specifically. And if you don't go save them, there's a problem, because you yourself, forget saving them, you're saving yourself too. The person who can't speak is going to become the spokesman. And this is what the Torah is telling us. Sometimes we think we're helping other people. I was just telling Joni today, nadie sabe para quién trabaja. It's my mother's favorite line. We don't know who we're doing things for. We don't know who we're working for. Sometimes you go out thinking you're doing one person a favor and you ended up doing what? Yeah, it ended up coming back in a way that ended up helping you as well. I'm going to keep going further. Actually, I think we should go towards the end so that we could bring it all together. By the end of the Parashat, we have this very unusual scenario. We had left off last week, I told you, good thing we did that recap, where the people said, I can't listen, we can't perceive, we can't absorb, we can't relate, I don't know what's a better word, we can't interact with this grand scenario. So what happens in the last chapter of this parasha, chapter 24, and to Moshe, God says, Ale el Hashem. If you were in 4th grade and you wanted to draw a picture of what actually happened with Moshe going up the mountain, there is at least 6 different scenarios that would all be right. Did Moshe go up and down 3 times? Was he up there the whole time? Did he come down and speak to the people? I don't myself, I read this a gazillion times and I still don't know exactly what happened. He went up the mountain, but then he came back down again when the people couldn't listen, but then he went back up again. Doesn't matter. The Torah is going to tell us this. Up and down, up and down, up and down. That is the image we need to have of Moshe. And why is that? Because every one of us is, in some capacity, he's a prototype for humanity. And you know what God is saying? This business of understanding God, of communing of God, of being spiritual is what? Is an up and down, up and down. It's not up, 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 up. And then you just, once you get it, you got it forever. It's like a heartbeat, up, down, up, down. The only time that it's going to be a plateau is in 120 years. And here Moshe again is going back up the mountain. When we read Moshe is going up to the mountain, what are we saying? What are we thinking to ourselves? We're thinking now again that the energies are flowing from where? From below, and they're going up the mountain because we're going to meet with God whose energies are coming down. And he takes with him Aharon, Nadab, and Avihu. He takes 70 of the elders of Israel, and he tells them to bow from afar. And then only Moshe goes up, but the others stay back. This is why I'm saying it's very hard to make a depiction. In some cases, it's Yehoshua who stays back. In this case, it's Aharon, Nadab, and Avihu who are staying back. I don't think it's me. I think the Torah is just giving us a lot of different scenarios. And Moshe comes and he tells the people everything that God had said. All of these Mishpatim, and the people all answer Na'aseh. You're familiar with the Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do. We will keep them. Moshe writes down all the words of God. He wakes up in the morning. He makes a mizbeach under the mountain, and he makes a stone made up of 12 elements to represent the 12 tribes. Then we have this crazy scenario that most people aren't even familiar takes place. It's called a brit. It's called a special covenant that is made. I'll read it for you so you could see it yourself. So they all make their altars and their sacrifices. Moshe takes half the blood that's in the basins. So when they would slaughter an animal, They would collect the blood. I'm sorry if this is gory and we're about to have lunch, but I'll clean it up in a minute. He puts it in a basin. It's called ba'aganot in these basins. And he takes half the blood and he puts it on the mizbeach. Everybody's comfortable with that. You know what he does with the other half of the blood? It's pretty gory, so I'll just read it to you from here so you don't think that it's me. Vechatzi hadam zarak al hamizbeach. Half of the blood he puts on the mizbeach. Then he takes the Sefer Habrit, this book that he just wrote. He reads it in front of all the people. And at this point, the people say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will obey. And then Moshe takes the other half of the blood. I'll read it to you in Hebrew so you don't think I'm making it up. I had to read it 3 times because the first time I saw it I was horrified. Vayizrok al ha'am. He takes the blood. Everybody's thinking like, what am I going to wear? Because I don't, whatever I'm going to get blood sprinkled on me and how am I going to shout it out? He sprinkles it on the people. And in this way, he says, Hine dam habrit. This is I'm seeing your face. I'm sorry that it's so horrible, but it's not. He said, this blood is the covenant that God has made with you about all of these things. And then at this point, Vaya al Moshe, and this word Allah is going to appear at least 7 times, if not more, where Moshe is now going up the mountain. But then a very odd thing happens. After he sprinkles the blood on the people, so maybe we should take a minute and stop because I'm looking. You should see what your faces look like right now. What does that symbolize? He's taking, let's go through it slowly. He's taking the blood from the basin. Half of it is sprinkled on the altar, and half of it is sprinkled on the people. What do you want to make of it?
Connecting them.
He's connecting the people, right? And the altar, which maybe confirms what we've been saying all along. You can bring an animal to God, and we'll sprinkle the blood on that animal. Or you could bring what? Yourself to God. You are human representations of an altar to God. Every one of us is an altar. Every one of us can go directly to God. That was the whole idea of Yitro. We don't need intermediaries. We don't need anybody in between us and God. We can go to him directly. So by taking, it's a little obscure. I don't know, did you ever even know that this happened? There's so many other exciting things that happen in the Parashat. Nobody talks about this one little thing about the basin and half. But I think that's the whole story. Because whatever is sotem, whatever closes, whatever seals a chapter is really the point of that chapter, of that Parashah. And this is what Moshe is telling every one of us today, because we don't have sacrifices and we don't have animals and we don't have a temple. So just as equal, chetzi, just as equal as it is to sprinkle blood on the altar, you too are altars and you always will be around. And see yourselves as that. And then the nicest part of all, and I'll end with this. So after he does this, another little obscure thing that not everybody knows about, but it's a biggie. After he does that, Vayir'u, the people, they see Elohei Israel, the God of Israel, and they depict what the people were able to see. It's hard for us to understand this, so I'm going to read it to you from here. Tachat raglav. This is not my anthropomorphic description. These are the words straight from the Torah, saying that under his feet, they're describing the feet of God, and they're saying under his feet, kema'aseh livnat hasafir. You may have heard that term before. It looks like maybe a sapphire brickwork. I don't know how to translate these words because it's not something that we're familiar with. Uke'etzem hashamayim latohad. And they see the essence of heaven in its most pure form. I'm going to stop here for a minute because the next piece is going to make you even more confused. Once Moshe designates that we humans are like the altar that's going up to heaven, what does it seem is happening here in the next verse? When we accept the mantle and we accept that we are able to be a korban, able to come close, able to rise to heaven, guess what? We have a totally different viewpoint. Our viewpoint is so expanded that we could see the throne of God or God himself. These are hard words for me to stand here and translate because I would never want to sound blasphemous or say that God looks like brick sapphire, but the Torah is using these words and telling us not only do we have the ability to connect to God like a korban, but if and when we do, we will see things that we never would have thought. If I stood here in the beginning of class and said, Moshe is going to open the curtain and peel away the curtain, and you're going to see God in all his glory with his feet and his sapphire, you'd say, Vivien, you're going to get arrested for saying such a thing. I myself, I'm uncomfortable saying it, but it's right here. We're able to see our eyes in our physical bodies, in our physical selves, in the places that we are, have access that we're not even aware that we have. We think, Hashamayim Shamayim Lashem, Haaretz Natan Livnei Adam. God's up there, we're down here, and never the twain shall meet. And the Torah is saying, stop that. If God's willing to come down to the mountain and invites you to come up to the mountain, and he's inviting you to be you yourself, you don't even need, what he's really saying is you don't even need what? The sacrifices, you only need yourself. If you're willing to believe that, which at that moment they did, then you're able to see the most magnificent things that we would never think are open to us in the physical plane. And this is the craziest part, and possibly with this, one, two more lines and that's it. Ve'el atzile b'nei Israel lo shalach yado. And you'd think, I want somebody to challenge me and say, wait, but God said, Lo yir'ani ha'adam v'chai. Didn't he tell this to Moshe? When Moshe himself wanted to see God, he said, show me your ways. God said, oh, sorry, you can't see me and live. And then he puts him in the cleft of the rock and he covers him and the whole thing. What's with this? What is with this big expose that God is showing himself and the Torah is recording it here? Not only do they see him, but the next verse says that God lo shalach yado. He didn't punish them. They were entitled, or they had access to see him firsthand. So much so, and this blows the whole thing out of the water. Vayachazu et ha'elohim vayochlu vayishtu. There's a lot of commentaries talk about. 1 minute, you're in the presence of the Adon Olam, the master and the creator of the world. And what are you doing? You're sitting and you're eating? How could you eat at a time like this? Angels don't eat, right? Remember when you try to give an angel food, the wife of Manoah, she puts it in? Okay, trust me, angels don't eat. And what is happening here? We have the ability to access the greatest spiritual experience and still, what is eating? Eating is the most physical thing that you can do. And in that state, we're able to do what? Vayochlu v'shatu. We're able to eat and drink. What is the Torah saying? It's not one or the other. You don't only just see the great white light when you no longer have your breath inside of you. The ability exists in this world to experience the highest spiritual height while you're still not only flesh and blood, while you're doing the most human thing, like on food, we don't eat, we don't drink, we want to be as less physical and more spiritual as possible. No, says God. If you're willing to recognize who you are and recognize that my office door is open to you and let go of all of the things that are holding you back, and boy, do we all have stuff. But if you're willing to put it aside and recognize And I'm going to sprinkle blood on you so you understand that you are the sacrifice. If you're willing to do that, then you don't need to be at Matan Torah to see me. You could be anywhere. B'chol makom, in any place that you call out to me, says God, I will be there and I will come to you. All you have to do is make the opening for me to come to you. That's what I believe Parashat Mishpatim is about. It's about making a space. I had used the word Kabbalah, nothing or very little about it, but I do know that the word means to receive. Kabbalah, lekabel, means to receive. And I think Parashat Mishpatim is asking us to open our hearts, allow for the kindness, for the glass of milk, allow for the space, allow forgiveness for ourselves, allow ourselves to stop being the victim so that we could keep the laws, and allowing ourselves to recognize that if God's willing to come down from the heavens, then it's a very short trip for me to go up that mountain. And when we do that, we will be able to recognize that there are angels holding our hands every step of the way. We may not see them, but God is saying there are dimensions to this world that you can't perceive, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be open to them and benefit from them. And with that, I wish everybody a beautiful week. Love yourselves, love your neighbor, and then you can go and get up that mountain.
Thank you, Vivien.